Tuesdays go. I started to say, I hope your Wednesday's going well, but we're only on Tuesday. So I'll stop wishing my time away. Okay, it looks like folks are trickling in. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about strategies at work, how mental health drives academic achievement, and how mental and behavioral health has a direct correlation with the outcomes that we see academically and overall school performance. Today, we'll talk just a little bit about what Illuma does. Illuma, we are a teletherapy provider. We've been in the space almost 12 years now, and we really focus on providing end-to-end solutions from special ed to mental and behavioral health. For kinder through 12th grade, we do dive down into the pre-K area some. Joining me today is Cynthia Kofall, and Cynthia is a former school counselor. She hosts a podcast called the Teen Anxiety Maze, and that's how I met Cynthia. And we just really hit it off. So I have thought forever, what could we do together? I just love all of our practical advice, and I think you guys are going to enjoy that as well. Um, and so our overview today, as I said, we're going to talk about how mental and behavioral health impacts academic performance. We're going to look at the connections, the positive impact that we'll see. We're going to look at reducing disruptive behaviors through a prevention approach. We'll talk about some practical approaches to drive and improve your academic outcomes by addressing behavioral and mental health. And we have some exercises or some activities for you to take back to the building. So before we get going, I'm just going to let Cynthia introduce herself for a minute. So Cynthia Kofall.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you are having me on this webinar today. Yes, I was a school counselor for 25 years, and I was a special education teacher before that for 6 years. So I know a lot about all the different diverse students. And I also, at some point in my 25-year career, did kindergarten through 12th grade. So I saw all levels. And now I am working with teens on anxiety through Zoom.
And I'm Brandy Samuel. If you've been with us at Illuma before, I've been at Illuma for about 3 years. Prior to Illuma, I was 32 years public school facing. Started out as a gen ed teacher, was a school counselor for a long time, and then morphed into a lot of other things, special ed director, assistant superintendent. I love crisis counseling and managing crisis situations, but I really always like to support staff and coach teachers and administrators through how can we best support kids to improve all of our outcomes school-wide. So we'll get started. So we'll start off with mental health and academic performance. How are mental health and academic performance related, and how do they impact each other? I like to think about academic performance and mental and behavioral health being circular. For example, when I have improved academic outcomes, we seem to have fewer behavior or discipline problems in the school, fewer absences. I like to think about it this way. So as a student, I may not read well. So I may become embarrassed and I may act out. Then I'm put out of school. Then I come back to school and I've missed more instruction. So then I'm even more embarrassed. I'm further behind. I get in more trouble till eventually I may drop out. So therefore, we have graduation rates impacted. We have college attendance impacted or any kind of post-secondary training. So that's how I like to think about it. Untreated mental and behavioral health issues have a pretty significant impact on cognitive functioning. We know that concentration is diminished, memory's diminished, problem-solving ability taps out, or students are not able to problem solve in a way that's age or grade appropriate. And we have reduced engagement, either with the learning materials or the required task around us. Cynthia, as you work with a lot of teens, both previously and now, how would you describe this, or what are you seeing in ways to help our students struggling, or what's going on in schools from your perspective?
Well, I think a lot of things that are going on, and I've been reading a lot about when did this anxiety first start, because a lot of people say the pandemic is what caused the mental health crisis and the anxiety crisis, but it really started when kids were given devices and smartphones. And that was back in 2012. And I was seeing the increase before the pandemic. So I remember, and I was working in schools when the pandemic happened. And I was there for 2 years after as we came back as hybrid. And I remember when people were saying the pandemic is why kids were anxious, I thought, I've been seeing this for a long time. And I didn't know what the reason was. I just knew that I had seen the increase. And there is a lot of data now showing the smartphone as being the beginning of when all kids, especially this Gen Z generation, their mental health started plummeting at that time.
I would agree. I was still in schools
Hmm.
prior to the pandemic and at the pandemic. And if I really think when you use the date 2012, I thought of a specific, probably four examples that I
Hmm.
could use right off the top of my head. So I would very much agree with that.
Hmm.
As more and more research comes out, we know that emotional well-being and academic success, when supported through social behavior programs, be it social emotional learning, be it culture, any kind of activities within your school building that promote a positive culture and a positive climate, we see, oh my gosh, sorry, we see all of these things. We see a reduction in disruptive behaviors. We see a reduction in conduct problems, conduct disorders. We see improved social emotional functioning. Just in the past 6 months, every day I receive some kind of data or some kind of study that supports social skill building for post secondary readiness and work skill readiness about the importance of this. We see better overall school functioning, which leads to increased academic achievement, of course, increased test scores. And in schools, what did we just see last week? The NAEP scores. 40% of our students nationwide are not proficient in reading. So what do we need to do to support that? I would argue, and I think the most of you would as well, we don't have 40% of our school population with a learning disability in reading. What's going on that we could support to just increase that functioning? We know that with improved academic achievement and improved test scores, we're going to have long-term academic gains because those all go hand in hand. Ultimately, everybody in this room, no matter if you're an elementary school teacher or principal, all the way up to high school, we know that everything centers around those graduation rates. We see an improvement there. And then we see an improvement in college attendance. I predict that in the next year, we're going to see studies come out that just show post-secondary training, be it training programs, going straight to work, that functioning. I believe we're going to start seeing some research around that. And then, of course, all of these lead to positive attitudes. And we know that when our students come to us with positive attitudes, we also see all this impact in a positive way. So the reason for all the arrows is all of these things are correlated. It's hard to separate one without the other. Cynthia has some really great statistics. I don't know if you want to talk about those, Cynthia, or
Sure. Well, some of the ones that I think were the most significant is there was a 32% decrease in aggressive behavior. And that's a very significant amount. And of course, that's something we want to reduce in schools. That when I worked in school, we were reducing the discipline referrals, we were reducing attendance problems, and we were reducing kids failing. And so, all of these things, social emotional learning or learning to regulate yourself, can affect all of those areas. And of course, we would want to do something that would affect all of those. Another one is the decreased conduct problems. It was a 9% decrease in conduct problems, which is still very significant. And they also had 11% gain in their overall academic achievement. And any of us that have done some social emotional learning and kind of tracked kids in our schools can see that when they feel better, they want to come to school, they want to do better, they ask questions, they have better behavior because the behavior that is disruptive is a message to us about something. And typically it's about either they have a skill gap of some kind, whether it's an academic skill gap that needs to be filled or an emotional skill gap, which I think is what we're seeing more of.
I would agree. I've always talked to everybody. One time, when I first came to Aluma, prior to me coming about 3 years ago, here at Aluma, we had really just supported special education students. We had done very little in the behavioral and mental health realm. And we started introducing services, and I had someone tell me, we sell mental health. And I said, we don't sell mental health, we support mental health. And
Mhm.
I said, how do you know that somebody may be having some challenges with their mental health? And they're like, well, we usually see maybe they're aggressive. So to your point, in my experience, it's always what I've seen externally, be it aggression or extreme withdrawal, that tells us what's going on inside. That kind of brings us to this point. This is just one of many studies. This was a case study done by Chicago Public Schools, and the statistics are pretty staggering. 160,000 students, eighth and ninth graders, across 6 years, and this is prior to the pandemic. But this also falls in that time when we started seeing cell phones at school,
Mhm.
and the most effective schools within Chicago Public Schools, they provided a welcoming environment. All the students felt safe and connected. We'll talk in a little bit about when our students feel safe and connected, typically so do our staff. And all of us sitting here know that staff retention is difficult, especially with educators. Those students that were at highly effective schools that were already performing in the 85th percentile around academics, saw test scores improve even above that. They also saw attendance increase and disciplinary infractions drop. Um, the students in Chicago Public Schools that participated in social emotional development programs, there was a 2% increase in the likelihood of graduation and 2.5% increase in attending college within 2 years. I thought this was really interesting. Oh gosh, y'all, I'm so sorry. In those districts that we know we have a propensity toward violence or aggression, and we have police on campus every day. And I think Chicago Public Schools, just due to the inner city nature and the urban nature, 20% less likely to be arrested on campus. That's a pretty staggering number, 1 in 5. So also, these schools used a PASS curriculum. PASS is an SEL curriculum. It's evidence-based. It really is strong in the area of self-concept, how to perform positive actions based on your self-concept. Telling truth is really emphasized within PASS. So that was a curriculum that they used through all this study. And then in this multi-year study, Chicago Public Schools showed that the program overall yielded positive impacts on student self-reported beliefs about aggression and bullying. And I really want to emphasize self-reported. You guys know that particularly in eighth and ninth grades, students either underreport feelings or overreport. So I feel like there's enough students in this sample that you could go to the midpoint here and get a good sampling. So at any rate, and then parental reports of bullying and disciplinary actions were greatly reduced too. So that's just one study. There's many studies that are out there, and they're actually very easy to find. I didn't know if you wanted anything about this one, Cynthia, or
No, that's pretty much what I knew and found about it. That's put together very well. We do have resources at the end too if people want to like look at other studies.
and I'll highlight those at the end. And then, so that kind of brings us to reducing disruptive behaviors. Did we want to pause here for any questions, Ash? Or
No questions so far, but just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Thanks.
okay, so reducing disruptive behaviors. We know all this information about how positive, proactive SEL support can increase our academic performance. But what do we do to reduce those disruptive behaviors? So the link between mental health and behavioral issues. Mental health struggles typically manifest through behavior. We're going to see anxiety-induced outbursts. We may see depression. We may see withdrawal. We see aggression toward others, be it verbal or physical. And then what is the function of behavior? For many years, I worked in a district and all I did was facilitate functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. And I really would have argued this point until I lived that every day for 2 years. That's what I did. And all behavior is either to obtain or to avoid. Just the study of human nature. Think about it. I want to lose weight. I avoid calories. I want to build muscle. I increase weight bearing activity or working out with weights. It's the same with kids. They either want to obtain, they act out, they get attention, they get access to the tangible items they want, and they have sensory stimulation. I want to escape or avoid, so I want to be removed from something that's overwhelming or undesirable, like an academic task or social interactions, or I'm afraid I'm going to fail, so I just won't try that thing and I'm going to get myself removed. How many students in your classroom have you seen act out, yell out, pick on another student because we started math or writing? Those are always the two triggers that I saw most frequently. So then the student was removed from the classroom, so they didn't have to go through the instruction. They didn't have to perform an activity they didn't desire or want to perform or feel like they could perform. So really that student won, right? So how do we shape that? Like, how do we really address and look at those disruptive behaviors? Cynthia, what do you feel like is most powerful here for everybody to walk away with?
Well, I noticed when I was working with students, I really liked to do motivational interviewing with them. And I know that this is typically one-to-one. So sometimes if you have a lot of things you're having to take care of, you can't just one-to-one talk to somebody about exactly what's going on. But we had a student once that came and she was so disruptive in this one class, and she started avoiding the class. She wouldn't go to it anymore. And as we just kept asking the next question, just trying to get to the bottom of what's really going on, she felt very unsafe in the room because she had been abused and maybe even attacked at one point, and she was sort of in the middle of the room. So when the teacher was walking around in the back of the room, she didn't like that somebody was behind her because she couldn't like feel safe that, I don't know what that person's going to do to me. And so we just moved her to the very back row where her back was really kind of to the wall. So when the teacher was walking around, they were always in her eyesight. She didn't have to turn around or there weren't other students behind her. And that changed everything. We didn't have any more behavior problems in that class. And it wasn't, she wasn't doing anything other than I don't feel safe, but she couldn't really verbalize it at first. When we were saying, well, what's going on in that room? She would just say, I don't know. And then we finally just kept asking questions. We found out she doesn't feel safe. Just moving her seat was all that it took to change that behavior.
So sometimes it just takes a few minutes and to
Mm-hmm.
down into something that might not seem significant to us as a teacher or school administrator, but is really significant to the student, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how do we address these behavioral and mental health issues? As a school leader, what are some things that I can do that are proactive, that are preventive, that happen early before behaviors get too out of hand? Um, One thing, train teachers and staff. This could be professional development. This could be coaching. This could be the opportunity to observe other classrooms. But how can we train our teachers and staff to recognize signs of mental health or concerns early? And I'm not advocating, when I was a teacher and before I was a counselor, I can remember how I would have felt. I'd been like, I can't recognize anxiety. I can't treat that. And that's not what we're asking. Just what do I need to be aware of so that I can bring it to the attention of the school social worker or the school counselor or the school administrator, or so that we can be proactive in how we address concerns. Create safe spaces for students. Where is there a space in the school or in my classroom that our kids can go to just have a break? Or is it a calming corner? Can they go to the counselor's office? Could they go to a peer group? And I know how this goes. I was a middle school principal for a period of time, and I had kids come to my office, and I would have teachers tell me, "You're not going to be like the old principal and send them back with candy. I want them out." And that's not what I'm saying. We need to find a place in the school or throughout the school where kids can cool off, they can reflect, they can get it back together and get back to class and be productive. Cynthia and I have talked about this quite a bit, really. And I think Cynthia has some great ideas around this one, just the safe space piece.
Well, I think also we need to have safe spaces for staff. I know that it seems different because they have to be teaching their classes, but they're in one school that I worked in, we did I think we called it tap out, and it actually was in a magazine at one time, so some other people might know about this. But if a teacher felt like I need a break from this class or I need a break right now, or maybe something's going on in their personal life, they would just contact somebody on the list. We had a list of people who were tap out partners or whatever. And then you could see what hours they were available. And we had tap out partners for every hour. So no matter what hour of the day you needed the break, you could find somebody to take your place for maybe that rest of that hour or maybe the whole hour, just so that you had a chance to also regulate and decompress and feel safe. Because schools more and more, the staff are feeling unsafe for many reasons, and that is just we need to make sure that we have safe spaces for staff as well as students. But yeah, any place that the students can go and feel like either have the time out and away from people or have someone to talk to about the things that are going on for them, that is that's one of the main things that we need to have.
I agree. I love the part about the tap out. I've talked so much we support a lot of schools with professional development, and I've done a lot around just teacher and staff well-being and caregiver
Hmm.
well-being. And I always talk about as adults, if I'm not okay or I'm not emotionally regulated, I can't take care of my kids. I
Hmm.
can't students. So I really love that. And I think any of us that have been in a classroom, we've all been there. Like I need to walk out of here because nobody's doing this isn't good for anybody. So we want to just keep everything as productive and as safe as possible. That brings us to school-wide positive behavior interventions. We've all heard about PBIS for a long time. And really, for me, I really think of PBIS as a way to create a positive culture and environment and to make things more preventive and proactive than all punishment driven. How do we teach and reinforce positive behaviors? A lot of our students come to us and we think, oh, they know that. Every kid this age knows that, but they don't. They don't have the skills. So we have to directly teach, a desired behavior. And then we want to decrease over reliance on punishment. Think about this. And Cynthia and I were talking about this before the webinar today. Is I've worked with so many parents over the years and teachers and administrators, and I've been in this boat before where everything has been consequence driven, punishment driven, and we've removed and removed and removed, and the student has nothing. But we never build in that positive, let's earn this. Or if I have so many days of this, I get this. And punishment works for some kids. I'm not going to say that it doesn't. When I was a kid, if you made me sit in the corner and removed me being able to see what was going on, I was devastated, you know. But how do I get back in that environment? So I'm not sure. I know that you have so much experience in schools. Where have you really seen this positive behavior support take a meaning of its own that was much more powerful than just punishment-based alternatives?
Well, I had a student who was getting close to graduation and he was just failing everything and he didn't care. And he would come to school every day. I think he liked being at school because he didn't really like home, but he didn't want to do any work either. And we were trying to figure out how are we going to get him to graduate and go on to something else. And again, with motivational interviewing, where I really just kept questioning him and kept talking to him about what is going on, he um, he revealed that he was really interested in cooking and culinary arts, and we had some a group of kids that could go to the local tech school and do culinary arts, but you had to be passing your classes, which he wasn't, so he could never go to that. And so I finally decided, I was thinking, what can we do? Because we can't just, make him pass all of his classes all of a sudden. He needs some motivation to do that. So we got him a job for 1 hour of the day working in our school cafeteria. And he got to do the food, he got to help prepare it, he got to help serve it. But that was a reward for if you do this work for this amount of time, then that's your reward to go into the kitchen and help prepare the food, which is what he really wanted to do. And he became the best help they ever had in the kitchen. And they ended up hiring him after he graduated because he was so good in the kitchen. And if we would have been punishing all the time, we wouldn't have been giving him a reward for not doing his work, but it was just a different way of thinking about it. Like what is our very base motivation that we can get for him? And we, just figured out what would be really encouraging for him. And then it ended up, and he was getting all this praise from people who worked in the kitchen. They were always saying, "Oh my gosh, she's the best person you ever sent to us." And that really made him feel good. So that was an example of if we were just in a punishment system, he would never have gotten anything and he would have just hated school worse and probably just failed out and not even finished.
Oh, that's a great story. I love that. I love it. And I just want to bring this up for everybody to think about. It's amazing what our kids, what our students will tell us that drives them that requires nothing of us. It's
Hmm.
amazing the things that some students are driven by. Because my guess would be, who would have ever thought he would have told you culinary arts and that you would have had an option there? You know,
Hmm.
I like to use a visual closure tool, especially with students with a lot of behavior needs. And it's X minutes of work, then you get to earn this amount of minutes of a reward. It is amazing the things they would tell me they would want to work for. And I'm like, are you serious? So we just need to ask. And the thing I
Hmm.
really love about that is it really goes to some of our next collaboration and communication. It allowed him to build relationships with adults that were
Hmm.
positive that he may not have had as
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Yeah. So as we keep looking for strategies for school leaders, one of the things that I really love are universal screeners. Cynthia knows this from me. I know she's heard a ton about this. I really love universal screeners, and I'm not necessarily talking about a mental health screener. And I know I've been in your seats as a school administrator, even as an assistant soup, where we bring up the idea of let's do a universal screener, and everybody in the room is like, okay, so what's going to happen, Brady, when we identify 200 kids with anxiety and depression, and I don't even have enough staff to support the students I know about? That's not what I'm advocating. I'm saying we address those. But what I want to look at when I look at a screener, I want to look at something that really looks at student strengths and where we can build up their areas of pro-social behavior. We can build resilience. Something like the DESA. The DESA is like a strengths-based screener. It's given to all the students in a grade level or a school. And we're really building on soft skills that are needed in that post-secondary or workplace. So I'm looking to build targeted skills, responsible decision making, communicating effectively, um, uh, making good decisions, whatever it may be. It looks at that Castle Five, but we don't, if you're in a state where you're like, oh, Brandy, we don't dare talk about social emotional learning. That's not what it is. It's really building the soft skills that we need to get along in society around us. I love those. They can be self-reports. We really identify those students who need to have some resiliency built in that are at risk. And it'll help us provide timely interventions. So we have data to support direct instruction to build the skill. Um, social emotional learning, just integrating SEL programs into the curriculum to build emotional regulation, resilience, academic focus. Remember, early on, we talked about when we have mental health deficits, our cognition is really impacted. We don't engage with learning materials. We have a hard time with memory. And then collaboration. We have so many community organizations and partners that would love to help us strengthen our systems. We just have to ask. Even in really small communities, it's amazing how many schools I talk to on a weekly, monthly basis that are like, well, we have this independent group, and it's a group of business women and men, and they come together and they help provide for this. It might just be snacks. I'm not saying it has to be money, but they really want to bring in your support systems. Or if you're in a community that is willing to partner and you can get a memorandum of understanding between the community agency and the school, wow, it's wonderful to do wraparound support with students, law enforcement, community mental health. Maybe there's even community physical health, like medical doctors, and then the school, and then we're able to bring in the parents and wrap around. So those are all other strategies to think about.
You know, I was thinking about this collaboration too, that I live in a college town and we partnered with the college and they came and did mental health talks during our parent teacher conferences. So parents come to the school and they're having to sometimes wait a certain amount of time between to talk to this teacher or they have several different kids and they have to like figure out a schedule. So we had people from the college, students and their professors coming and talking about mental health topics for parents, and they would have something that they could engage in and ask questions and talk with them while they're waiting to see their child's teacher for the parent teacher conferences. So I thought that was a good combination. And also sometimes those students would come and practice their therapy skills with kids that we had at school, which were so helpful because we needed more help with the mental health part. And then they needed more practice hours. So we had a good partnership that way too.
Oh, wow, I love that. It's like a mentorship as well, too, which I know kids benefit from so much. That's very good. And a resource that I wouldn't have thought about, but it's right there in your
Hmm.
back, so to speak. That kind of just moves us into overall mental health awareness and mental health vocabulary. I don't know about you, Cynthia, but I feel like really, I guess since post-pandemic, and when we saw all the ESSER funds come in, which we know have sunsetted, I believe, and what I observed, or we saw a lot of stigmatism removed around mental health. And I really love that whole child approach where we're looking at academic growth, we're looking at the emotional growth, and the social behavior growth. So we're looking at a very well-rounded student. And we know these are all interrelated. We've showed that. But I also really love the mental health vocabulary. I know that when I first started teaching and way before I was a counselor, we never talked about any of this. We didn't bring this up with our students. Like if the counselor was going to do some guidance lessons and we had that once a month, that was great. That's when we talked about it. But otherwise, it was very hands off. And so now we don't really have that. We're really looking at mental health vocabulary to build empathy with others, being able to include others. Children really benefit at all ages for the sense of belonging. That's that safety piece. And then just respect for others. And then, as I see it, all three of these go together. Mental health awareness. I'm aware that not everybody's like me. I'm aware that people are struggling, but I'm going to be sensitive to that. I'm going to have empathy. I'm going to include those that are different from me, and then I'm going to foster respect, which really leads into the open communication piece. So when we have open communication among our staff, students, and caregivers, then we create that safe space. Students are comfortable coming to teachers or staff members or adults in the building to say, hey, this is how I feel, or hey, I need help. But what's really important here, and again, this is something else that Cynthia and I have talked about so much, is we really have to train our staff how to manage their own stress and burnout. Because we're in a day and age where in society, all of us in the workforce feel a lot of stress. And
Mhm.
educators are really taxed with a lot. So Cynthia has some really great strategies and ideas around this open communication and staff burnout.
Well, I did a talk a couple of years ago with administrators about that teachers need to feel psychologically safe. And the reason I found this out was I decided after I retired to do a burnout stress group with teachers because I had just come out of the school. I knew they were stressed out. I had some really good tools that I wanted to teach them. And I had people coming to it was on Zoom, and I had some people coming to it, but they always had their cameras off. They didn't want to talk. So I started to talk to them individually about what's going on. And they said, I don't want my principal to find out I'm coming to this meeting. I don't want, even though they didn't even work in the same schools, they were so afraid that someone was going to find out that they were struggling with stress or burnout, which is a normal, everyone struggles with that from time to time, but they were so afraid that their principal would put them on a plan of assistance. And I realize this is just their perception, and that wouldn't be necessarily what was going to happen. But it told me that staff do not feel safe in their buildings to feel feelings or to say that they're struggling or say that they need help. And so then I started thinking about, well, how can that happen? And I was, doing some research and trying to figure out how can schools be more psychologically safe. And some of the things were that the administrators talk also about the struggles that they have. Now, obviously, no one needs to get super personal about what's going on, but to just acknowledge that, yeah, sometimes I'm struggling too, and sometimes I need to take a break. And saying, we're going to have a no phone policy over the weekends. I'm not going to contact you to do things over the weekends, or I won't expect you to be, answering your texts over the weekends. Just things that are self-care and that it's sort of universal across all, administrators and all staff so that no one feels like, oh, I can't say that I'm struggling or I can't let people know that I need help.
I love that. And it's so important. I was in my former workplace. It text messages went off until 10 or 11 at night about,
Mhm.
hey, when you do this, and you're like, if you're a very responsible person and you really think I've got to do this, when you get a text at 10 o'clock at night from your supervisor, like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So I think that's so
Mhm.
um, just kind of in observance of time, because I want us to be able to get to question and answer. Some of these I'm just going to go through. They're a little bit redundant. Benefits for a school climate, all the things we've talked about really build that school climate. When we have a positive climate and culture, we're going to have reduced classroom disruptions. We're going to see behavioral and self-regulation, and that school culture is going to be supportive. Um, we all want our learning time increased and that focus. When we allow our students time for reflection and focus, maybe we could build that into journaling or some kind of structure within the day. And we'll talk about that a little later on. And then, like, how can we have students feel heard? Morning meetings. I know they take a little time, but they don't have to. Students start feeling a part of a little community in the classroom. We're going to practice our skills throughout the day. We're not just going to have a guidance lesson once a month or whatever that may be. And we're really going to support and train our staff. So practical approaches to drive positive outcomes. Again, some of this is redundant, but it's so important that we hear it. Early identification and intervention. How are we going to identify those students who are at risk, that we need to work on their resilience and we need to work on their pro-social behaviors? Social emotional learning. Are we going to have curriculum and interventions? Are we going to have programs and activities? And we're going to come back to this in just a minute. I think it's really important. And then collaboration across teams. Just like we see tiered support for academics, how are we going to support mental and behavioral health in a tiered way so that we bring in everybody across the disciplines? So we want to look at a holistic approach. I want to just circle back for a minute and have Cynthia talk about this. I've observed a lot of schools over the years, and I'm so fortunate here at Illuma. I talk to schools every day, and they talk to me a lot about students generalizing or not generalizing. And we know in special ed, especially when we're dealing with behavior, that when we teach our students to generalize across settings, the interventions are more effective, the students are more successful. So Cynthia, one of the things that I really advocate when I talk to schools is let's don't just teach social behaviors. or expected behavior and isolation, how can we really interweave our SEL support and our social behavior interventions throughout a school day?
I really think that it just takes a couple of minutes. And if you are in an elementary school, I would suggest doing this at every transition. If they're, even if everyone's staying in their seats, but it's like we're transitioning from reading to math, do something for a minute or two that helps give them a stretch. They take some deep breaths, like trying to really ground themselves and regulate themselves again to start the next activity. That's going to get their brain going anyway, which is what we want to be happening while we're in the classroom. And I've noticed that there's tons of like YouTube videos that are 1 or 2 minutes long, and all it is a circle that starts small and then it just says breathe, and then the circle opens up. And then the circle goes back down, and they have a visual to look at, but it's also helping them take some deep breaths. I don't know if you can see it in my little picture, but I have one of these that I use with my clients as a way to just an example of we're going to breathe, we're going to open our lungs, we're going to hold it, we're going to let it back out. And you can do that at every transition. And it's really needed at every transition because some kids have a hard time transitioning from one topic to the next. And it even gives us a little break where we can become grounded and we can get back into whatever the next set of things. And then when I think about middle school and high school with the bells ringing, so much stuff happens in the hallway between one class and the next. People are making up, they're breaking up, they're getting in fights with their friends. They found out something bad happened at home by looking at their phone. Somebody texted them. I mean, there's so many things that happen in that time. And when they get into our class, we want them to be able to calm down, ground into our class so that they can learn what we're trying to teach them in that time. So at every bell time, I think there should be something that brings kids back to, okay, we're at school, we're learning, I'm ready to learn, I feel safe. And you can, again, just do this in a minute or two, and you can do it in different ways. Maybe if I were a teacher, I'd want to do something different every hour just for something, fun for me, so I didn't have to do the same thing. But whatever works for your class, and you'll probably find some classes get a favorite that you just use as your way to let's get back to business. This is, time for class now.
I love that. Just that time to refocus and recenter.
Hmm. Hmm.
And here we have several examples throughout the presentation that Cynthia was so great to provide. So I'll let you look at that when you have time. And then why do we want to intertwine social behavior, social emotional learning, and support throughout the day? Everybody in this room knows, what do we do when we're teaching a skill? We practice it. It's repetition. Scaffolding. We can adjust the complexity of something by the grade level. Like maybe with my kinders, I'm just going to breathe, or I'm going to hop up and down, or whatever. Maybe in my fifth grade, I do a turn and talk, tell one strategy. Maybe in my middle and high school, I have a journaling activity that builds on each other, but it's really a writing assignment I'm trying to get to that I'm just weaving in, that I just slide in for the students. And then teacher insight. The more that we're able to interact with our students and build positive relationships and that insight that we have into the students, the better we are able to create those safe spaces and have that open communication. Cynthia, particularly with your teens, why would that teacher insight be so valuable?
I think it's important because we don't see them all the time. And the teachers, they really do have a pretty good gauge on what's going on. And I would find that you can also figure out trends based on, sometimes kids do amazing in one person's class, and then the next person's class, they're doing terrible all the time. And having that insight, oh, this class is it the time of day? Is it something that's happening in that room? Just like the student I talked about before, she was having such terrible behavior, but it was really just about where she was seated in the classroom. I mean, all of those things give us an indicator. And then I would ask kids if they said, I love this person's class and I hate this class. We would talk about what is it about what works for you in this class? What doesn't work for you in this class? How can we bring this to a win-win with, I would always tell my students, you can't get everything that you want. Like it can't just, the school can't just be exactly what you want, but how can you get enough of what you want and the teacher can get enough of what they want that this can be a win-win situation?
I love that. And I think it's so important for us as teachers or school staff to tap into what others are doing that's successful, that I'm,
Mhm.
just because it works for somebody else, it might work for me too if I try
Mhm.
it. So I love that. And then improved mental health leads to improved performance. And this is really what we've talked about the whole day, just how to weave that in. We talked about the Chicago Public School Survey, Castle. So that's the foundation for social emotional learning. And you may hear about the Castle Five and responsible decision making, communication. Um, oh my gosh, Cynthia, you're gonna have to help me here. I can always come up with two.
I I'd have to have it in front of me.
Anyway, so CASEL is the driving force around social behavior, social emotional learning skills. School functioning and academic performance are woven into all of their studies. There's literally, I Googled it, and even the CASEL website says hundreds. And I
Mm.
started trying to drill down and find some, like in less than 5 minutes, I found 50 studies to support how any kind of targeted social emotional learning, social behavior support, there are all kinds of studies to show improved outcomes. If anything, it supports your staff so that they can be the best version of themselves. So they're the best version for students. And just the instruction is more effective and efficient. Um, Again, academic performance. One Castle study says there's 11 percentile points compared to those students who had no social behavior instruction, or they had no climate or culture initiatives that centered around including students, making students feel a sense of community or belonging. And then, interestingly, Castle goes on to say that even after students left high school, those who had had strong, positive school climates with social skill building had 13 points higher in their post secondary academic performance, be that in college or a training program. So we see that those soft skills are important. They're important to success. And
Mhm.
then reduced disruptions and behavior management systems. This really gets into what we talked about earlier, that prevention and punishment. We want to be proactive. When we have peer support and a supportive culture, we have an inviting, inclusive culture where everybody's welcome, that's safe. I don't walk in and think I've got to get in the closest room I can. And we know that happens in schools all over the United States, all over the world. When we're really focused on that mental health vocabulary, we see a sense of empathy, inclusivity, and respect emerge among all of our students. When we build a school-wide mental health plan, we make a multidisciplinary team that involves all kinds of staff members, even students or parents or community members. And we're going to assess the needs, what's going on in my school. And what might be going on in one school in the district might not be a need in another school. So what's going on in my school? How do I set goals and develop a comprehensive plan to address the mental and behavioral health needs of all the students in my school? Where can I find evidence-based programs and curriculum? And believe it or not, there's a lot of free resources out there that are very good, that are evidence-based, that are good. They're just practical. How do I allocate resources? How do I ask for resources from central office to support these things? Collect data. How do I collaborate with my mental health team or the community or the district, other district leaders or staff? And then how do I assess the impact of what we're doing? And I always say start with one or two things and build every year. If you try to do everything you want to do at once, it's not going to be successful. You're going to get weighed down. Um, Direct instruction. How do I teach targeted, desired behavioral skills? How do I do that? And is it a skill deficit? Do these students have the skills, or do they have the skills and they don't want to perform? A performance deficit. And to Cynthia's point, find out why we're not performing when we have these skills. Talk to kids, ask. Most of the time, they'll tell you. Um, Monitor implementation. How are we implementing our climate culture and instructional practices throughout the day? Um, evaluate what's working and what's not and adjust. It's okay to say, hey, this isn't working and we're going to adjust. We don't always want to be pivoting on students, but it says a lot for us as adults when we say, you know what, we've tried all these things. It's not great. Let's try this. That's okay. And then a healthy school environment. So we want proactive interventions and we want a healthy school environment. And that really comes from positive teacher and student relationships. Ash has heard me say this so much. I always say, you got to know your students. You really have to know your students. And I know that's easier said than done. I know it is, but it's so important. And then build engagement, motivate, and a sense of belonging. How can I motivate students to be here that don't want to be here? Cynthia gave a great example of the young man that they allowed to work within their cafeteria. That's what he was motivated by. I could go on and on about this, but when we think about this slide, Cynthia, what do you think is the most important for anybody here today to walk away with today?
Well, I think that our schools forever have been based on power over, and we're the adults and we're the decision makers, and the kids are just there and they do what we say. And this generation that we have in schools now, they don't resonate with that. They are much more power with. And I feel like if we bring the kids along, we get them involved in these programs and these systems, like we ask them, what do you need? What do you want? What would be the best way to do this? And have them work with us to create these programs and systems. They're going to be much more likely to go along with us and help us and follow them than if we're just saying, we decided what this is and we're telling you how to do it.
I love that. You know, we're in a different time for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we live in such a society of immediacy and people need to feel a part of and part of that decision. So I think that's such an important point to make. And then as we conclude, these are the things that really just sounded like a call to action to us. Key things to keep in mind. Equitable access. When we're thinking about equitable access to a positive climate and culture and behavioral support, if you can universally screen and look for strengths and where are the deficits I can teach to, I can provide direct instruction, that'll be huge because you're reaching your entire population that way. Those who really have a lot of strengths, use those students for your peer support if that's what they desire to do, or set up situations where those students can model. Whole child approach, directly instruct academically, physically, behaviorally, and socially, right? Address the needs of adults. Let's build as much capacity as we can with our staff so that they feel safe, they feel like they can recognize and look, and they feel like they have the tools to speak to behaviors that are going on around them or student needs. And then safe spaces. Let's really prioritize that prevention. If a student feels safe at school, they're much more likely to be engaged. They're much more likely to interact. So how can we prioritize that prevention? These are ways. Evidence-based SEL curriculum. And remember, I told you some of these are free. I'm not saying go spend money you don't have because I understand the tight budgets. We all are facing those. Promote positive relationships. How can I build positive student relationships in my building? How can I build positive student and adult relationships? As well as with my community and my parents, the caregivers. How do we get a full wraparound? And that's hard. That's easier said than done. But think about ways that have worked for you. Skill development. Let's proactively teach the skills we want to see and let's embed those throughout the day. Address the root cause of the behavior. What does this kid want? What are they seeking to gain? What are they avoiding? What are they running away from? And then early intervention. If I stop this now, it's going to be much easier than it is when it gets out of hand. It's kind of like that old adage. It costs a lot less to fill up the tank before it's empty with gas than when it's empty. So what can I recognize early that might just take a little tweak to help a student? And then just
Hey, Brandy, we do. Oh, you're right, going right into it. I was going to say, I have a question. I have a few questions from the crowd. So I'll go ahead. Sorry to interrupt here. we have a couple people asking about, do you have any, and this is for Cynthia, do you have any particular channels that you follow for virtual counseling? Do you have any recommendations for your grounding videos and stuff like that?
I've seen them on YouTube. I know that schools kind of go back and forth with using YouTube. Sometimes it's like it's fine to use it. Sometimes they don't want people to use it. I would think there would be other ones though. I don't know if you could project them, but Calm and Headspace, those two apps on phones, have these kind of really quick, short, you can look up like I want it to be 1 minute or 2 minutes. And maybe you could even, if it's something that's just auditory, you could play it on your phone. There are free, at least there used to be, you could have Calm and Headspace for free. They have a paid option where it has more things, but you could use those things. In my office as a school counselor, I would use Calm and Headspace on my phone and just play something that the student listened to or did. But I know in the classroom it's a little bit different. But I know they had YouTube videos that were just, like I said, the ball was just opening, getting bigger and closing, and it would say breathe on it, or it would there was really no words or anything, and kids would just do that for the first minute when they get into their seats or when they were transitioning lessons, and then they just went back to work and did school things.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. And then we had one more question. Everyone's interested in your resources. So I know you have a section at the end as well. So people are wondering, do you have any particular resources for motivational interviewing?
I just looked up, you can just and get free motivational interviewing questions just by Googling that. Also, if anyone is using AI, which I love and use AI quite often, I would put in a prompt something like, like I would write what my situation is, like what the student is doing or what I'm needing help with. And then I would say, give me some motivational interviewing questions I can ask the student. And I didn't use that in practice at school because AI wasn't even there when I was there, which is so crazy to think about how that's changed in the last 2 years. But that's certainly something that I do now with my clients is ask AI to help me come up with really good questions to target certain situations or themes that I want to target. So you could do that as well.
I love that. AI can certainly be a positive thing when used in a good way, in
It,
a
it can be used for so many good things in education. I'm super excited about it.
me too. Me too.
Perfect.
Any
Both of our people who asked questions said thank you. So
oh,
you nailed
yeah.
it.
Perfect.
Any other questions? And you can see all the resources, the references are back here. Here's some sample activities that Cynthia was so nice to add. And um, that's really it for us. I'm happy to stay around. I'm sure Cynthia would be too if you want to
Sure.
in it if you don't feel comfortable asking in front of the group. But um otherwise we're ending pretty close to time. I just hate to run out of time and we don't get to anything. So I appreciate you coming. I hope you'll join us again sometime.
Thank you.